Okay, quick music disclaimer here. I do not own the rights to this music, which belongs to the rightful owner, who is the intoxicating mind of Dr. Frankenstein. So he made my intro and my outro, and I hope you guys enjoy. Check them out on Spotify and YouTube, and no copyright infringement is intended. Have a good day.
A clear choice of good versus evil, of right versus wrong.
Twisted Tales.
If you like paranormal, true crime, cryptids, or anything else weird, check out the Ouch Was That a Ghost podcast brought to you by your host Liz. You can find Ouch Was That a Ghost on Spotify, Apple, or any other audio platform. New episodes drop every Thursday.
Welcome back, folks. Hope you guys are doing well. And I just want to say, I appreciate the messages for new stuff here. So, this one here is going to be a viewer request. This one's from my buddy Baker. And today's episode, we're going to be talking about Mothman. So, this should be a little interesting tale here. And if you guys want to send me any stories to cover, you can email me at twistedtalespodcast@outlook.com. And send me your shit, I'll get to it. I mean, it just seems I'm always, finishing up viewer requests, and, it's not a bad thing. Now, this tale here, like I said, it's from my buddy Baker, and it's gonna be Mothman. So, this will be part of, West Virginian folklore. So, I don't want you to think that I'm going all Richard Gere on you guys here, so... this one, I only know a little bit about. Now, my friend Liz covered this a while back on Ouch Was That a Ghost podcast. And you should check her episode out too, it's awesome. So, let's start firing this one off here for you guys. Now, tale goes here that the Mothman is a humanoid creature that's been seen around the Point Pleasant area back in November of 1966, and the sightings lasted up until December 1967. So in 1966, there were two gravediggers that were in Clendenin, West Virginia. Now, they were digging a grave, but they were interrupted by a giant black figure flying directly above them, and they had no idea what the hell this thing was. Now, a few days later, another sighting report had rolled in, and this was about a large creature with 10-foot wings and glowing red eyes. Now, the creature chased them while they were driving, he flew right after them and kept up with them at high speeds, that's fucking insane. Now, this was close to a former munitions site, just a little bit out of town. Now, a munitions site are sites that are known to contain unexploded ordnance or discarded military munitions. Now, when the news got hold of the sightings here, then it reached the town folk. It kind of got into the newspapers and stories, and other tales had begun. Now, this was about a moth-like creature living by the local nuclear plant just outside of Point Pleasant. Conspiracies began to grow. A lot of them brainstormed in people's heads that the Mothman was a failed secret government experiment. Now, the local papers ran the story here about the sightings and everything, and not long after doing so, about 2 days later after they ran the story, the whole town descended upon where they thought the Mothman would be. So, his reported sightings and whatnot. And it was just an angry gun-toting mob. In all their searches, they never found the creature. The creature was totally unseen. But people would eventually be ready for it with their rifles and everything, because that was just their preferred weapons. Now, more sightings came in that it was seen lurking outside people's homes, chasing random cars, and even stealing beloved family pets from people. And a home of the family, the Partridges. Now, they lived up in Salem, West Virginia. So they had a German Shepherd named Bandit, and Bandit ended up bolting into the woods there, and he was chasing after two red circles, and then the dog got lost in the woods. Now, Mr. Partridge went in to go look for his pet, like we'd all do, right? That's our little buddy. And upon looking, there was no sight of poor little Bandit. Upon entering the woods to look for his dog, the man did find, some paw prints in the dirt. It just seemed like the dog had ran around in circles, as per what he seen by the paw prints. And then he vanished. There was no other paw prints around the area besides, the ones running in the circle. Now, maybe the dog was just trying to protect his owner. Seeing the glowing eyes or something that, he tried to pursue the beast. But, that's what any dog would do if anybody was in trouble, right? Now, a woman named Mary Heyer, she was a journalist for the Athens, Ohio Messenger. So, this was a local news source for, the northern neighbors of Point Pleasant. Now, she ended up covering some stories of the sightings of the strange encounters of the Mothman. So she published her first article in November 16th of 1966. Now, this led her to a paranormal journalist named John Keel, and they did work together on a couple things, and he did the Mothman Prophecies, and he wrote a book on that, and then it was, made into a movie starring Richard Gere back in 2002. So, good movie, you should check that out. And although the Mothman sightings, they sort of dropped off there in December 1967, a pretty bad tragedy happened in Point Pleasant. This was at the Point Pleasant Bridge. Now, just a little bit on this bridge here. So, this was an I-bar chain suspension bridge. Now, an example here, an I-bar is like a straight bar, usually metal, with a hole at each end for fixing the other components, and these are used in structures such as bridges. Now, this was built in 1928, and it was officially named the Point Pleasant Bridge, but it was very popularly known as the Silver Bridge, because that was mainly because of the color of the aluminum paint that was used on it. Now, it has a total length of 2,235 feet. It was constructed by the American Bridge Company, and it was designed by the J.E. Grainer Company. And the bridge opened up to the public May 30th, 1928. Now, on December 15th, 1967, the bridge collapsed during very heavy traffic, like rush hour shit, right? Now, this resulted in the deaths of 46 people. 2 people were never found, and an investigation into the matter had pointed to the failure of a single I-bar that was located on the suspension chains as a primary cause of the bridge collapse. Now, just let me break down the bridge collapse here. Now, the defect had been in a single link known as I-bar 330. This was where a small crack was formed through the fretting, and then it wore off at the bearing, and then it grew through internal corrosion. And this is also known as stress corrosion cracking. This is when the lower side of the I-bar fails, and then the load had been transferred to the other side of the I-bar, and that failed by ductile overload. Now, the joint was then held together by only 3 I-bars, and then another slipped off the pin. This was at the center of the bearing, and then it completely severed the chain. And then it caused the whole thing to come tumbling down, which was inevitable anyway. Now, this damage would have been very hard to see during, the initial inspection and shit, because it would have just been, a very tiny crack. And at that time, the technology used was not capable of detecting such cracks. The public ended up blaming the bridge collapse on, the sightings of the Mothman, because as the time all these sightings were going on, that's when the bridge collapsed. So they blamed the bridge collapse on the doings of the Mothman, even though they just had a perfectly good explanation and an incident report of why the bridge collapsed. And the Mothman was still blamed for the fucking collapse of the bridge. This would even, give rise to the legend, and nobody really seemed to care that the bridge literally collapsed due to, stress, corrosion, and fatigue. And this fucking developed over years. Oh, hey, look at all this shit. Oh, there's a problem. The bridge is gone. People are dead, but let's blame this fucking creature, right? And some say the Mothman should be considered an evil, fucking creature, and that's it. He carries around bad luck to all he meets, and it causes disasters in some way. And some say that his sightings are usually to warn people of accidents and other impending doom, right? And while some thought that he had a hand in the bridge's destruction, there are some say that Like they think that he just showed up, said, hey, this bridge is gonna collapse and fucking you guys should probably look out. And for a sec here, I just want to go back to that munition storage facility that I mentioned there. Now, these were like around rows of World War II era bunkers. Now, these would make a good hiding spot for the Mothman, right? Now, this is where like the locals thought he was hiding out. Now, they nicknamed this place the TNT area. And as folklore states, he'd been seen around the gates of the abandoned munitions facility. And nobody knows why he chose this area as its home. I mean, perhaps the bunkers and the dilapidated laboratories and stuff, maybe that gave him some passage for hiding and shelter. And there's no signs or markers for this site. In order to gain access, one would need to hike, or fly like the Mothman, right? Spread your wings, folks. Now, the reason it's called the TNT area is because the region was mainly devoted to an ammunition manufacturing facility. This has well over 8,000 acres, and this was used during World War II and employed thousands of workers. Now the explosives were stored in bunkers just for safety precautions and then strategically scattered across the territory, and then it was disguised by thick layers of earth. Now after the war, it was all pretty much abandoned, except for wildlife and shit that would come around the area. But it was severely contaminated with explosives, and it was added to a federal list of hazardous waste sites that had become eligible for cleanup. Now, it's now known as a land for hunting, fishing, and everything like that, and it's still being cleaned up here and there by the EPA. In May 2010, one of the bunkers that had about 20,000 pounds of unstable material had suddenly exploded. Nobody was hurt in the explosion. And, even the dark bunkers in the Erie land, it would make a very nice place to hide for, a Mothman-like creature, so all the power to him. Now, a local resident of Point Pleasant, Jeff Walmsley, he grew up listening to stories of the Mothman. Now, his father worked at the armory there that we had all the ammunition and shit that we just talked about. Now, he opened up a museum, and this had a bunch of collectibles, like police reports of the sightings and other witness accounts. And even though Walmsley was around the age of 6 when he heard the stories, he was really amazed and how bewildered that the townsfolk had gotten over the whole ordeal. And over time, he released 2 books on the matter. In 2001, Mothman, Facts Behind the Legend, and in 2005, Mothman, Behind the Red Eyes. Now, he also had a hand in running the annual festival there. And this had welcomed crowds over 15,000. This was before COVID and all that. And this was a great source of revenue for the town. And it would help engage in local tourism. But with the tourism and other ideas there, there's also talks that the Mothman goes beyond the alleged sightings. It also spills over into some UFO and Men in Black stuff and other conspiracy theories. And it's kind of cool that the museums and stuff that they have of the unidentified creature, the sightings are what made this guy a big deal. And let's talk about a little bit about the other out of this world ventures here, the Men in Black stuff. Now there were reports that the Men in Black were seen in Point Pleasant. Now they had their black suits, white shirts, black ties, shoes, all that, perfectly dressed to the nines. And that was a little bit odd for those times. I mean, being the 1960s, whatever, right? Everybody had their own different wardrobes, right? Now, they're said to have questioned local residents about the Mothman and then told people not to speak about them. And this usually ended up in threats just to keep residents quiet. Now, the resident that we mentioned earlier, Mary Heyer, the newspaper reporter, now, she had an interview with the Men in Black that she found very frightening. And it was at no point in the interview, she noticed that these men never blinked. They never blinked their eyes at all. They looked like human beings, but she also noticed that their fingers were longer than average, and their skin was somewhat transparent. And she often wrote about the Mothman sightings, the odd time in the newspaper column. and there was one column called Where the Waters Mingle, and she kept up on the subject, also claiming to see like weird lights in the sky on more than one occasion. And all these stories about this like got the Men in Black's attention, so she was visited by them. And it said that the Men in Black, like, they visited her quite often. This was more so just to try to put a stop to her releasing any newspaper reports. She passed away February 15th, 1970, at 54 years old. And she worked for the paper for 27 years. That's a long time. And, you're good at your career. Good for her, right? Now, some say that during the time the Mothman was near the area, some would notice like static-like sounds coming from their TVs, like just straight TV static sound. And this was a sign that he was flying overhead, or nearby, whatever. And there's other reports of strange phenomena, like disruptions of other electronic devices, phones, police dispatch radios, and automobiles. They would also be disrupted when the creature was around. Now, another little conspiracy theory here that surrounds the Mothman here, like many link his arrival to be around the 1700s. Now, this was around the time of Chief Cornstalk. So this guy was the leader of the Shawnee Nation around that time. Now, he had been wrongfully killed in the year 1777, and many believe that he put a curse on the area just before he died, and this would end up leaving the town in tragedy over some period of time. Now, a popular little theory on this is that the Silver Chain Bridge and the curse that was attributed by the Shawnee chief, Mr. Cornstalk, this kind of believed it to be connected, as the curse was to avenge his death, and after the bridge's collapse, the Mothman sightings kind of slowed down. I just want to head back to the earlier reports here. Now, the reports of the Mothman, this came from a couple that I mentioned earlier. So, just a weird little thing, right? Now, it was the night of November 15th, 1966. Now, the couple were Linda and Roger Scarberry and Steve and Mary Mallet. Now, they were driving around in a 1957 black Chevy. Now, they had reported that they were driving around the abandoned power plant, and they suddenly seen two large red eyes, which reflected the light from the car's headlights. And they seen a grayish-like figure with huge wings take the corner of the power plant. Now, they stated the creature was roughly 7 feet tall and could fold its wings into its back, and then you could see like huge muscles in its legs. And then they sped off down onto Route 62. But when they headed down that way, just to keep driving away, there was like a huge hill next to like a huge billboard. And there was the Mothman, and it spread its wings, and it flew straight up into the air. And then, as they drove faster, the creature had began to glide back and forth around the back end of their car. And then, when they finally hit a straight stretch of road, they were doing well over 100 miles an hour. And the creature was still able to keep up with them, like he was flying pretty fast. Now, the creature was now so close that they could hear the Mothman's wings flap off against the top of the car roof. Now, they remember the sounds that it made as it was like flying overhead. They said it sounded like a squeaking of a giant mouse. And when they were finally able to get away, they reached the edge of town, and the Mothman had ended up flying off into a field. All in all, it's like some pretty crazy stuff. The impact that the Mothman had on Point Pleasant, and Point Pleasant isn't that big a place. Like, there's, 4,146 people as of 2019 census. Now, the town has a number of stores, though. Like, there's food items that became themed after the Mothman, too. Like, there's even, like, a fucking Mothman festival that goes on that we talked about, too. And this kind of commemorates, like, the 1966 Point Pleasant, West Virginia Mothman sightings, to which people do gather from all over the world. Like, they have live music and shit. And in downtown Point Pleasant, like, the Mothman Museum, too, like, they have lots of, like, preserves of everything, of, like, the whole mystery of it all, right? And They also built like a big Mothman statue to commemorate the sightings. And there's always going to be skeptics on this shit too, like, but in reality, like, the myth, like, the legend, everything, it kind of keeps, like, a pretty much, like, once dead town back in business. So, I mean, like, it keeps revenue up, so there's nothing wrong with that. There's other sightings here too, mainly in the Chicago area. So, this was around 2011. Now, a couple were in Chicago staying with their folks. Originally, the couple was from Washington, D.C. Now, around 9:20 p.m., the husband and wife were on the way back to her parents' house, and this was after they went for a walk, and this was along Lake Shore Drive. Now, they got to E. Schiller Street, and they saw something in the distance, but it was getting closer, and then eventually flying towards them. And then it flew upwards, over the trees, directly in front of them. And then it reached a height of about 20 feet, and then it kind of hovered in the air for all of 5 seconds, and then flew backwards, went into like a little bit of a dive, and then headed towards the woods again. Now after this, the couple sort of like speed walked towards an intersection, and they headed towards the entrance of a condo. But all of a sudden, the Mothman was directly in front of them again, hovering some 5 feet above the sidewalk. Now, its wings spread wide open, staring directly at the couple with his red eyes. Now, as they moved back and forth, like, they were a little bit weary, right? So, like, what the hell, right? We don't want to get too close. But they weren't the only ones that noticed this. There was actually a delivery driver across the street, and a few other spectators that let out a couple screams, right? They're like, what the fuck? So, obviously, they're going to be frightened. Like, normal reaction to seeing a giant fucking Mothman creature anyway. You know, just chilling in the middle of the sky. So, he hovered abroad for about 10 seconds, and then pulled its wings into its body, and then took off into the night. It made no sound other than the rush of air as it flew upwards. Now, witnesses described the creature as like a human-like, with a small head. It kind of narrowed at the top. Had legs like a human, and long-ass feet. Now, very wide wings. And some of the spectators kind of recall that it resembled that of like a butterfly. And, like, it had like butterfly patterns on it or whatever, right? Now, the size of its wings were stated to be roughly 10 feet long, and it looked to be like he was a dark bluish gray color, almost like a shiny like skin or whatever. And other sightings from Chicago tenants kind of came in too, like they also reported some sightings. Now some seen it fly over like condo buildings, some have like seen it pass through like while they're looking out the window. I don't know, it's just kind of crazy with like the sightings, whether it be like true or hoax. I mean, that's entirely up to you guys to decide too. I mean, I'm just the guy telling the tales here, right? And it's very similar to like even like some Bible passage stuff here. Like, it's written about angels and how they show up throughout history, right? And the general area where they're reported to be seen, this is kind of like where an accident or like a tragedy will then happen. So, I mean, it's exactly how like the Mothman sightings had happened before, like around the bridge and stuff. I mean, before that whole thing fell apart. I don't know, that's just something that I thought I'd mention to you guys, you know, I thought that was kind of cool. There's tales of, like, around the O'Hare International Airport. Now, this is in Chicago. They also had some sightings of the Mothman. Now, a man who worked at the airport had a run-in with Mothman on one of his shifts. Now, here's how his story went. I heard what sounded like some chirping sounds and some scuffling coming from nearby. As I looked around, I noticed a sort of clicking coming from across the street. Now I looked up, and I saw a very tall, thin, human-like creature with his wings spread out, standing on top of the HVAC plant. Now, HVAC meaning heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. And then it directly looked at him with his red eyes. And they had like a kind of a stare down that seemed like forever. But in reality, it lasted about 5 to 7 seconds before it flew away. And the next day, the man told his coworkers what he had just witnessed. And a few of them spoke up, and they had mentioned that they had seen it too. They told him that there were sightings like all around the HVAC plant, and it had been seen by a few employees over the years, anywhere from like baggage workers all the way up to pilots. Now, a woman also had a close encounter with the Mothman, and she worked there as well. Now, she had been walking to her car when her shift was done. You know, doing the normal shit, texting, walking to her vehicle. And she also began to hear the chirping sounds, followed by the clicking. And she mentions, like, it's as if someone had been, like, clicking their tongue around, but it was at, like, a much faster pace. Now, she looked around, and she heard a screeching sound before she noticed it was running in her direction. And then it had gotten about 10 feet away from her, and then took off into the air. And it flew directly above her, and then vanished. And, like, there's other mentions here, too, like, different sightings here. Like, there was one at Columay Park area. Now, a police officer and his son had noticed that the Mothman was flying freely amongst the park area. And they're like, what the hell, right? So, scared shitless, obviously. You know, they took off and left. And I just want to go back to the Men in Black here for a sec. Now, some accounts with witnesses that had interviews with them. Now, they remember the Men in Black having a robotic way of speaking. So it was really unnatural. Like, they weren't of this world or whatever, right? It just seemed like their whole appearance was fucking off. Like, cause, like, the way their eyes were, like, their long fingers, everything, and, like, distorted voices. And they also asked a lot of disconnecting questions, like, I don't know, it's kind of said, like, both the Mothman and the Men in Black, like, they possess, like, hypnotic powers. Oftentimes, when people meet, like, the Men in Black or the Mothman, like, they lose, like, hours, minutes, or days of, like, memory loss. So, it's kind of almost coinciding with, like, UFO abductee stories. And it's a little known fact here that the creature was dubbed the Mothman after a character from the TV show Batman back in the day. So the one with, like, Adam West and shit. And the character was called Killer Moth, originally in the DC comics, like Batman comic number 63. And the real name of the character was Drury Walker, Drury. And this was created by Bill Finger, and it was drawn by Dick Sprang and Lou Schwartz. And it's just another supervillain in the comics there, or maybe perhaps in real life. Even our buddy John Keel here, like back in January of '67, him and the newspaper journalist Gene Heyer were working late in the office, when all of a sudden, a very short man with weird eyes walked in. His eyes were covered by extremely thick glasses. He had black hair, and that was in full, bowl-cut passion. And he asked Heyer and the manager for directions on how to get to Welsh, West Virginia. So they gave the man the directions, and the conversation sort of pressed on. All of a sudden, the man left mid-conversation after stealing a pen and laughing very manically as he exited the building. And he never said anything else. That was fucking crazy. And that's actually a great little thing. Like, I don't know, that made me happy to read that little part about the man taking the pen. And lastly here, like, some think the appearance of the Mothman, like, it's believed to be that of a demon. But without evidence, it's pretty hard to guess its nature. It's definitely a product of folklore. I mean, as far as human cultures go, like, there's a fucking lot of chock full of, like, telling and retelling of tales. And most are just like ghost stories, aliens, monsters, other kinds of like beasts and shit. I mean, sometimes maybe it just could be your mind playing tricks and just a willingness to believe certain things without evidence. But these are all tales to be told nonetheless, and they need to be told. And if it's been, like, since the 1960s, like, he's pretty old. I mean, that would probably make him, like, in his 60s, I guess. Like a 60-year-old creature. And I'm not sure what age gap, like, that would fall into, like, for a fucking creature. I mean, maybe he could be a senior citizen now. Who knows? Like, living his best retirement life. Maybe he's just chilling, watching his biography on TV, being narrated by Richard Gere. So, that's it, folks. That's all I got. This is my Mothman episode. I hope you guys enjoyed. Thanks for tuning back into Twisted Tales, folks.
Remembering those lost in the tragic Silver Bridge collapse in Point Pleasant. It happened 55 years ago tonight, claiming 46 lives.
An event that left so many heartbroken. December 15th, 1967. 55 years ago, the Silver Bridge collapsed during rush hour traffic. The bridge, which crossed over the Ohio River, connecting Point Pleasant and Gallipolis, collapsed due to a small defect on a single eye-bar in a suspension chain. Later, this led to important changes for the future of bridge construction, prompting the adoption of National Bridge Inspection Standards in 1968. But for families all over the tri-state, they lost loved ones that tragic day. And Thursday, a crowd of people gathered to remember their names.
Christy Ann Bowles.
This tragedy has affected so many in this community, and I actually spoke with one woman who was the daughter of one of the 46 people who were named tonight, and she says it's still heartbreaking to this day.
I lost my mom on the bridge. I was 23 years old.
Roxy Stover says her mother, Nora Isabel Nybert, was driving across the bridge when it collapsed. She says after they heard the news, they immediately got in the car and drove to Point Pleasant.
The drive down here that night was absolutely eerie. The bridge went down on Friday, and we found my mom on Sunday. There was some that never found.
A tragedy many wish never happened. But in honor of those 46 names, this community is making sure it's never forgotten.
I want to impress upon those beyond the years of myself not to forget this.
Hunters in Mason County may need to be on the lookout for something other than deer when they hit the woods this week.
Up until Sunday night, he hadn't been spotted recently, but according to these pictures, the legendary Point Pleasant Mothman is back. These pictures, supposedly taken by a man who says he was driving along State Highway 2 in Point Pleasant, saw something jump from tree to tree, so he pulled off the road to take these pictures. The man declined an on-camera interview, but is adamant the pictures are real. And some locals like Carolyn Harris believe it.
I definitely know that the Mothman's real.
Harris has owned the Mothman Diner for 48 years. She also helped start the Mothman Festival. Harris said there's been too many sightings of the Mothman for her not to believe.
First responders, the church department and stuff that I talked to, that they definitely made a believer out of me.
Harris has met many Mothman believers over the years, like the Smiths.
You have eyewitnesses, so, yeah, it does have potential, and I do sort of want to believe.
We asked the local Mothman expert and owner of the Mothman Museum, Jeff Wamsley, just how authentic the pictures are. Wamsley said, with modern technology, it's almost impossible to know for sure if the pics are real. But even if they are fakes, the benefits of the Mothman's legend to the town of Point Pleasant are very real.
It's a good thing. It brings a lot of people to the area. It's here to stay. It ain't leaving.
Fallon Pearson, Eyewitness News.
Now, many people tell us they believe the Mothman is a bad omen, only appearing when catastrophe is about to strike. There have been many claims the winged, red-eyed creature was seen right before the Point Pleasant Silver Bridge collapse back in 1967.
Twisted Tales.